Vampire. The Masquerade Swansong utilizes the rules of the 5th edition of the Vampire, the Masquerade tabletop game. The game follows the vampire communities of Boston and Hartford as they attempt to join forces. Players control 3 vampires, Gallup, Leisha, and Emmem, from different clans in the Boston Camarilla. Vampire. The Masquerade Swansong is set to release for PC, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, and Nintendo Switch on May 19, 2022. There's no question that Vampire, the Masquerade is a confusing franchise. Based on a tabletop role-playing game, there are multiple publishers and developers all contributing to the same franchise, and the console maker Big Bad Wolf Studio is just one of them. Due out next year on the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 4, Vampire, the Masquerade Swansong is a choice-driven thriller in which you'll play as 3 different vampires in a heart-pounding story in which your choices decide the fate of Boston. Each character has their own vampiric disciplines that can be upgraded to suit your preferred approach, the official blurb reads. Will you choose intimidation, seduction, or stealth? It's your decision, provided you can keep the hunger for blood at bay. With its unique approach to gameplay, Swansong puts the emphasis on consequence. Analyze each situation carefully, the choices you make during the investigation, and your social interactions with characters can have a lasting impact on the fate of your heroes' lives and the fate of the Boston Camarilla. For those not in the know, Vampire, the Masquerade is a tabletop RPG released in 1991 by Mark Rain Hagen of White Wolf Publishing. Those in the know about these things would also say that Vampire, the Masquerade is the first of several tabletop RPGs White Wolf Publishing set in the world of darkness. The tabletop game is set in a goth punk fiction version of our current world, with the players being vampires. The vampires in the game are known as the Kindred, and the game has players deal with their vampiric nature, other vampires, and various vampire hunters. Vampire. The Masquerade's main premise is the fact that the Kindred are beholden to a thirst inside of them called the Beast. The Beast is an all-consuming predatory drive inside all Kindred that drives them to do whatever it takes to survive. This means that when it rises, the Beast-beholden Kindred will do things that they normally wouldn't do. After all, survival is the one thing paramount to all things. Depending on the situation, anger, bloodlust, thirst for blood, and dangerous threats can cause the Beast to rise. Thus, it's up to the players to not only control this predatory drive but also deal with other things that the Kindred need to deal with. These can range from other vampires, vampire hunters, to threats to their masquerade. In addition to Vampire, the Masquerade, the World of Darkness setting has 4 other tabletop games as well. These are Mage, the Ascension dealing with mages, Changeling, the Dreaming for the Fae, Werewolf, the Apocalypse which has werewolves, and lastly, Wraith, the Oblivion, deals with the undead ghosts. Vampire. The Masquerade Swansong is stated to be a narrative RPG. This means that a player's various choices throughout the game will have massive implications on the game's story. The various characters each have their motivations and plans throughout the game, their desires competing and fighting with each other. After all, they're vampires and are thus beholden only to themselves and their sects. If their competing interests were to be aligned, then they'll work together. If not, well, that's where their abilities as vampires come in. Swansong has 3 characters that players can use throughout the game. Emmem, a vampire from Clan Toreador, Gallup of Clan Ventru, and lastly, Leisha of Clan Malkavian. Each of these 3 vampires has their unique abilities, both natural and supernatural, and it's up to the player to use them to great effect. For now, we have no idea what these abilities would be since Big Bad Wolf only showed brief character trailers of the 3 of them. However, looking at their clans might offer some insights on how they'll play in the game. For now, though, we won't be talking about that in the gameplay. Instead, we'll talk about the various vampire clans in the story setting sections. It's there that we'll talk a bit about the 3 vampire clans that we're dealing with. In addition to the current situation in Boston, the city that Vampire, the Masquerade, Swansong takes place in. Controls-wise, we don't know much about how we'll be controlling our 3 Kindred protagonists. We also don't know of any other game modes other than the single-player campaign. We'll just have to wait and see how these things pan out when the game's released this year. In the aftermath of the massacre, the player will try to unravel the many mysteries surrounding the attack by controlling 3 separate characters. All of them are approximately 100 years old, and each has their own storyline, personality, backstory, and vampiric disciplines. Before the game starts, the players will be able to fill out their individual character sheets to customize their social and combat abilities, as well as the power level of their specific disciplines, all of which will affect the available dialogue and options for each character. Galeb the Ventru is the man we see first in the trailer right after having a snack. Galeb seems very fond of clubs, sharp facial hair, and intriguing compass-shaped tattoos. He also features prominently in all of the gameplay images that have been released so far, proving that when you've been alive long enough, holding a decapitated head is not so different from intimidating a night guard to give you some information. Emem the Toreador is a seductive Amazon with impeccable taste for skinny daggers, limousines, and lip gloss. Emem is the second vampire to appear in the trailer, and, in good Toreador fashion, she has a red rose next to her seat. Leisha the Malkavian looks infinitely more sad, poor, and conflicted than the other two and is apparently dependent on some kind of blood concoction to function. She also has an intriguing collection of blood samples stored in a mini fridge in her sinister bathroom. Hazel Iverson is the new Camarilla Prince of Boston and the owner of the inviting voice we hear in the trailer. Iverson is also known as the Swan, and she lives up to that name. She has tattooed a stylized black swan at the top of her spine, which she also uses as a logo and a seal on her invitations. She wears her nails square and black like swan's talons, and in Swansong's trailer, she can be seen either goaling or blood bonding a subordinate while she takes in Boston's night lights. Iverson's clan has not been revealed. Vampire. The Masquerade Swansong is set in the World of Darkness setting as we've already mentioned. What we didn't say was when and where on the setting this takes place. Vampire. The Masquerade Swansong takes place a few years after London, one of them, if not the biggest centers of vampire life, has fallen. In addition to this, a lot of the vampire elders have either died or disappeared, leaving a really big power vacuum. All in all, the 21st century is not a good time to be a vampire. Luckily for all of them, they have a bit of hope. Boston still stands as a bastion for the vampires to gather around in addition to the new leadership of the Boston Camarilla with Hazel Iverson. They now stand to usher in a new age. The new prince, yes, she's called a prince, wants to strengthen the Camarilla by bringing Hartford, another vampire hotspot, and Boston together. This will allow the Camarilla to ensure the safety of vampires in the northeastern US as well as ensure their survival. We already know of the 3 vampires that the players will follow throughout the game. However, we don't know what their motivations are. To know this, we have to look at the clans they belong to, and how they interact with the Camarilla. In Swansong, the focus has moved from faction rivalry to a struggle for survival and individual ambitions, particularly after earth-shattering events like the fall of London and the Tremere Chantry in Vienna. In this context, the Boston Camarilla is trying to make sure that every vampire in the northeast of the United States is protected and cared for. The Tremere Chantry of Hartford, a traditional stronghold of this clan, will play a significant role in the game, and one of their blood sorcery rituals was featured in the trailer. In the game, both the Boston Camarilla and the Tremere Chantry in Hartford are concerned by the increased risk to the Masquerade posed by an increasing number of fledglings feeding on the streets, and their common goal is to secure a safe, reliable and discreet supply of blood for every vampire that needs it. This motivates them to sign the peace treaty of reunification that opens the game before the celebrations go awry. Finally, Swansong will be part of the canonical metaplot that ties the World of Darkness together, and going forward, the events of future Vampire, the Masquerade products. Last but not least are the Malkavians, who are insane. No joke, they're the insane ones amongst the vampire clans we're talking about on this list. Why this is the case is unknown, but this insanity allows them to gain particular and uncanny insight into the world itself. This manifests as prophecies, visions, and portents that can sometimes be very dangerous for the Masquerade as a whole. Thus, they're mostly tolerated as necessary existence, but a lot of the other vampire clans keep a wary eye on them. After all, you don't know what goes on in the mind of the insane, you don't know what they'll do or who they'll tell. Combine this with the secret of the Masquerade and the whole vampire society, this can lead to some pretty disastrous results. These usually manifest as pranks, so to speak, and they can range from a silly joke to oftentimes sadistic and disturbing nightmare fuel.